So today, Thursday, Parshas Lech Lecha. So we'll learn Sarai Ishtecha Lo Tikra Shma, Sarai Ki Sarah Shma, which is Anid Gimel, and then hopefully we will finish up with the last mimer here, which is the mimer that's repeated at every bris in Chabad. Be'etzem Yom Hazeh Mor Avraham. Okay, so we're in Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Sarai Ishtecha, Sarai, your wife, her name was Sarai. First, Lo Tikra Shma Sarai. Should not call her Sarai anymore. Ki Sarah Shma, because her real name is Sarah. Hinei Shinui Hashem Shel Sarah. So everybody's, a lot of people today are into changing their names. So where did they get this idea from? So obviously it's from this parsha. The first two people in the world whose names were changed were Avram and Sarah. And Avram became Avraham, that we talked about in the beginning of the week. And Sarai became Sarah. Sarai was Avram's niece, the daughter of his brother Haran. There's a few shitos about what the order of their birth was. The Gemara has a machlokas in it, in Sanhedrin, on page 69b. That's the question about whether it wants to prove how long, what's the youngest age that a man can have a child at. So it brings a chitofel as the example. And then it wants to get into the question of how many children can a woman have one after the other in the shortest amount of time. So one of the examples it brings is the three sons of Terach, Avram, Nachor, and Haran. And the order in the Torah is Avram, Nachor, and Haran. So in any case, in dealing with that question of how long between the births, if they were actually born all together at once, if they were a triplet, in which case they're not a proof for anything. And so that's one option. The Ben Yoyada, the Ben Ish Chai, he has a very interesting explanation of why they would be triplets. And from one of the psukim, it seems like they would be triplets. The other pasuk that the Gemara brings there, it seems that they're not, because it has the word et in between. Et Avram, et Nachor, ve'et Haran. So from that, the Gemara learns that it wasn't in the same conception. However, they could be from the same conception and not triplets. How could that be? So this the Rebbe brings. It's a very interesting thing in and of itself. And he brings it on the Tanya that was on Tuesday, if I remember correctly. And there he says that in the future it says that Harav yoledet gam yachdav. Isaiah says that in the time of Mashiach, the woman will give birth the same day that she conceives. That's what it sounds like. So he says there's two different interpretations of this thing. One of them is that yes, every day she could conceive and give birth. But he says that's not physically possible. And he brings this Gemara in Sanhedrin to show that even physically they can't do that. Rather, what's the other option? That from one conception she gives birth to many children. So one option is like non-maternal twins. Right? You have two ovums. They're sitting in the fallopian tubes, and both of them become conceived. Both of them become fertilized, and usually the children come out at the same time. But they don't have to. He says right now the nature is such that if two ovum were fertilized at the same time, then they'll come out together at the same moment. But it doesn't have to be that way. He says there could actually be that a person would be like there's many animals, like the classic example is the chicken. Right? The chicken, if it's fertilized once by a rooster, I don't know for how long, but I think it's for about a year, all the eggs that it will lay will be fertilized. They can turn into chicks. If it's not fertilized, they're like our eggs, which are inert.
Our eggs.
Our eggs that we eat, that can't turn into chicks. But he says the same thing will happen by women then. And that makes more sense physically. That from one conception, one act of procreation, the woman will be able to give birth many, many times. And that's what Isaiah is talking about. Not necessarily that it has to happen a day after a day, because that's very short. But it could be a day after a day, meaning that they would have procreation once, marital relations once, and then one child would come out on Sunday, the next one would come out on Monday, the next one would come out on Tuesday. It's not very common, but it even happens today. There are such things even today. In any case, we got to this because of this whole thing that Avram and Sarah, their names were changed. They were first people in humanity whose names were changed. And they were changed by God. And the reason that he changed their names was because he said, Hinei shinui Hashem shesara u'liot labchinat holadah.
It's probably backwards. If the woman has to give birth, 4 or 5 times within 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That's why conception is only going to happen once.
Might be true. So, in depth, the reason is this we have to research, but that's another whole sugya. It's in Choros, and Daf Chet. The whole story with Saveh de Ve'atuna. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania goes to the philosophers of Greece and captures them for the Roman emperor. But that is all preceded by an argument between Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanina and another philosopher, one of them, about how long is the maximal amount of time that a snake can give birth after copulating. And there, the interesting answer is that the colder the animal, meaning the colder, like the snake is the essence of coldness. It's a cold-blooded animal is also an example of it, but biologically. But the colder the animal, the colder the semen, as it were, the longer it can retain itself. It's being fertile in the female. So for the snake, it's up to 7 years, and this we know today to be true. That a female snake can give birth to fertilized eggs 7 years after copulating. It's a record in the animal kingdom. There's nothing that can do that long. So here there would also be like an idea like that the man would have a certain coldness to him, because what is the Mashiach? Mashiach is overcoming the snake. How do you overcome something? You integrate it into you in the right way. So when the Nachash will be integrated in the right way into humanity, so then it could be that from one act of procreation, she could give birth to her whole life, because the semen would remain. Today it's only 3 days, say Chazal. It's like the most. In any case, so they were the first 2 people whose names were changed, and they were changed because they couldn't give birth. They knew that according to astrology, it's tagidinut, is how Chazal call it, but it comes from the word, I guess it comes from the word astro. Itzta is like an astrologic, astrology. So from there they knew that they could not give birth. And it was a tremendous act of kindness that Avram married his niece. First of all, he married her because Haran was killed. He also went into the fiery furnace and he was burnt. And so his 2 children, Lot and Sarah, were left over. Sarah's earlier name, or another name that she had, was Iska. So this girl, he married her. Lot, he adopted as a son. That's why he came with him everywhere he went. He was also Haran's son. So they were both orphans. Nahor, his brother, Avram's brother, who again, according to some opinions, is older, and some opinions he was younger, he adopted and he married the other daughter of Haran, Milcah. So they were a family of loving kindness. It's a family that because that's the ultimate loving kindness. It's to take an orphan girl and to marry her. But it was a double loving kindness in the case of Iska, because they saw that she couldn't give birth. According to their science, whatever they had at that time, astrological science, whatever they had, they knew that she couldn't give birth. So Hashem changed the name so that they could give birth. And we know from the fact that Avram was able to beget Ishmael before he changed his name. So from that we know that Avram wasn't sterile. It was really just Sarah. So Hinei Shinui Hashem Shel Sarah Uliot La B'chinat Olada was the change of her name from Avram was in order to allow his effluence to come down in a different respect, not in terms of his ability to give birth, but in terms of his ability to affect everyone with holiness. But Sarah, she couldn't give birth. That's the holiness of a woman. The holiness of a woman comes down to her childbearing ability. K'ma'amar Hazal, Sarai lo teled. As the sages say, that they knew that Sarai could not give birth. V'im ken tzarich lavin, halo ma'alat hayud gavoa min ha'hei. So now he asks seemingly a very technical question. He says, but in between the two names Sarai and Sarah, Sarai is with a yud at the end, Sarah is with a hey. So in Hashem's name, yud is higher than the hey, because yud is the first letter. It's the chokhmah, it's the bittul, it's everything that's high. And the hey, even if it would be the first hey, it's still just bina. It's lower. Ki yud chokhmah, hey bina. V'noda ki yikar holada mibchinat chokhmah. But this is not just technical, he says. Because when we're talking about something coming out, something new coming out, so that comes out from chokhmah, not from bina. So when you say to give birth, you have to understand man is not giving birth to copy himself. He's not doing a copy paste. By animals, it's copy paste. All he's doing is he is creating an identical copy of himself, the animal. So the horse gives birth to a horse that's exactly like him. There's nothing new there. How do we know there's nothing new? Because we haven't seen a horse suddenly act like a sheep because he needs to, or act like a cow, or do anything. They retain their nature. They can't change it. So in that sense, they remain the same. So it's not coming from the mind, it's coming from the midos. But in a man, when I give birth to my son, he could be completely different than me. If I sit and learn, he might be a sports person. No connection at all. He's not interested in what I do. For him to do what I do is like death. It's like not being in this world. It's one of the things that a lot of parents don't understand. You didn't come to copy-paste yourself. You came to create something new. And to create something new, that comes from Chokhmah. It doesn't come from Bina. Why? Because Chokhmah comes from nothingness. And the nothingness, as we said last week when we were learning this, according to most opinions, there has to be nothingness in between every two beings. So if one being is going to create a different being, there has to be a point of nothingness in the middle. So there has to be Chokhmah in the middle, wisdom. But if you're going to... So what he's saying is, it's not that Sarah was necessarily infertile. She might have been very fertile. But she could only... If she had only Bina, that's the understanding right now. Okay, that's the Hava Amina. She could only give birth exactly like an identical twin of herself. Which is very interesting, because that's exactly what women can do, that men can't. Yeah. For instance, in the snake, going back to that, we know there's something called, I don't remember what it's called, that the snake fertilizes itself, as it were. It doesn't really fertilize itself. It just makes the sperm, it just makes the eggs fertile in some way, that they're not inert, but they will be complete 100% genetic copies of the mother.
I think tigers also.
All in theory, all females can do that.
Yeah.
The snake is just the one that we know, we've seen it a lot. In other forms of life, I don't think it's ever been seen, but theoretically it's possible. Basically, what they did with Dolly, with the sheep that they what do you call it?
Cloned.
They cloned, was to facilitate that process. But they weren't even sure how they did it. I don't know if to this day they know 100% why sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But it's actually building on something that already exists in the female. So that's called giving birth from Bina, from understanding, because Bina is yesh. There's no ayin there. ואיך נהפוך הוא שלהיות לקוח הלודה לוקח מאיתה כוח היוד וניתן לו כוח ההי במקומו. So seemingly the order here is the opposite. She had a yud, which would be the power of giving birth to something new, something from nothing, a new being from nothing. and he gives her instead the hey, which is something from something. So that you're calling now to give birth, she had something better before.
If the hay is bina.
What do you mean? Of course it is.
No, the hay that Sarah got in her name, was it a bina hay or was it a malchus hay?
It doesn't matter. In any case. Even at the highest level, if it's malchus, it's even less. It has nothing of its own. So what's the answer? Va'inyan ki Avraham v'Sarah m'chinat chokhma ila v'chokhmat atam. Aha. So now we have to understand that Kabbalah is all relative. So you know this. You want to say it for them? Sure. Relative means that when you say chokhmah and bina, you say wisdom and understanding, you say yud hey, you have to ask, where are these yud and hey situated? So that, as it turns out, because there's inter-inclusion, so there's yud hey at every level. So at the highest level, the level of chokhmah, they're called chokhmah, they're called ima ve'aba ilayin, chokhmah ve'bina ilayin. They're called the supernal yud kei. And really, there's the supernal yud kei within the yud. That's how they are. So there, really, the hay, what he's saying here is that the hay that Sarah had was the hay of the yud. Okay. How do you see this, for instance? So says the Arizal, it's very easy to see it. If you write the yud out in full, yud vav dalid, so now you see that really there's a yud there, the first letter, and the vav dalid itself creates a hay. And so there's really a yud kei within the yud. You write it out in full, so you see that the yud itself, the first letter of Hashem's name, contains two letters, yud and hey.
The vav dalid, put the vav under the hay,
Okay.
and it becomes a hay.
Right. And so that, and really there's such a thing that when you write Hashem's name, sometimes there's a kavana that the foot under the letter that's not really connected should be more connected. Okay. You make it a little bit longer, so it looks like a little bit more like a vav than like a little yud. Usually it looks like a little yud. So, והנה למעלה כך הוא עמידה. עיקר הולדה להיות מציאות הולדה חדשה על ידי צמצום דווקא. כי אם היה אור אינסוף ברוך הוא מתפשט כמו שהוא בבחינת אינסוף, לא היה אפשר להיות שום התהוות מציאות כלל. אפילו על ידי ריבו רבבות השתלשלות, כי כשמו כן הוא. אין סוף להתפשטותו. So it says in Yud K of the Yud, in the higher supernal Yud K that are within the Chokhmah itself, there, indeed, the Hey is like a sense of yesh there. It creates a tzimtzum, because if there would not be any tzimtzum within Chokhmah, really the power of tzimtzum, like what he says here, comes out from the hay. It doesn't come from the yud. The yud is not tzimtzum. It's bittul. But the power of tzimtzum is the yesh, the feeling of it's like what we talked about in the early two first days of the week, that there's some kind of masach, there's some kind of curtain separating from the source and how things come down. So that he was writing about what he wrote before. And so Sarah is the one, she's the curtain here. And she's separating the yud so that the light can come down in a way, the effluence that's coming down through Avram will be able to be sustained in the world and not destroyed because it would be too strong.
Right. I mean, it's a little bit of a paradox, because you can understand how there can be yesh within the level of yesh. Once you go up into the level of Ilah, where everything is bittul,
right?
So very nice. You can understand bittul within bittul, but how do you understand the concept of tzimtzum and yeshos within the level of bittul? It's a little bit paradoxical.
Yeah. So how can it be? Because even here, we're not talking.
חזרת או שלא טסת?
זריז.
לא, ברצינות? אז כמה זמן היית?
אספר לך עוד מעט. So even here, we have to say that when you talk about the yud, you're still not talking about the real type of bittul. You're really not talking about the essence of bittul yet. It's not the full bittul yet. There has to be something even higher. Because here you already have, again, it's inter-inclusion. So there's an aspect of the opposite within it. So it's not pure bittul. It already has some aspect of tzimtzum within it. some kind of masach, some kind of that has to stop, because if it was pure bittul all the way through, it would just be a conduit for the infinite light, and there would be nothing stopping the light from reaching the lower levels and destroying them. So we know that's what happened in the world of Tov. That's what we talked about 2 weeks ago.
Right. So the level of yesh within the inter-inclusion level of bittul has to be such a unique tzimtzum
Right.
that it is able to handle that infinite bittul on the one hand,
Right.
but then also transform it into preparation for
being received below.
yeah.
But because of that, he says she can't give birth, because she's too involved in taking care of her husband, as it were. Let's call it like that. So this is a tremendous example of how sometimes the way a woman treats her husband is her undoing. It's very interesting. Because if she's too engrossed in stopping him, because she feels that he's too, I don't know, overbearing, overflowing, whatever it is. So it might be that she's also closing herself up to being able to give birth. That's one thing. The other thing that comes out, which is a little bit easier to digest, is that depending on how much she can open herself up to allow her husband to, say it another way, to allow the house to be an open house instead of to close it. So that allows her to give birth. Meaning, if she's too involved in supporting him all the time and not opening the house up to other people, then she can't give birth. If she's very open to other people and she's not so, you don't see her so involved there, it might be, especially if she's an intellectual type, so she'll give birth very easily. It's a very interesting thing that comes out of this. And if she's too involved in stopping his light, which could have all kinds of meanings. One meaning is that she's just worried about him all the time, and she can't host guests. Like, she can't allow anything else in. So then she'll find it hard to give birth. Let's give it a more down-to-earth mashal. If I'm a thinker and I have a lot of ideas, but I'm worried all day about how they'll be received, what will it sound like? And is it too hard for people to understand this? Should I make it easier? Is there an antithesis to what I'm saying? Is a counter-argument that wouldn't allow somebody to accept my chiddush or something like that? I'll never ever write it down. I'll never distribute it, because I'll be too stuck with my bina. My bina will stop the flow of my mind, of my chiddush, of my ability to bring something new into the world. That's in the person himself. Between me and myself, I have chokhmah and bina also in my chokhmah. So my chokhmah is where my new ideas come from. If my bina and my chokhmah is working overtime, and this person who's second guessing himself or just worrying that what he's saying is not going to be accepted, he'll never be able to do it.
No, well, that, I'm not sure exactly. I understand what you're saying. I mean, the way I would understand that concept would be, if the bina experiences too much of a yesh, if it experiences the yesh too much, then it is self-conscious.
So that's self-consciousness.
Self-consciousness.
I'm not experiencing necessarily myself. I'm also myself, but I'm experiencing the world too strongly.
So too strongly. So it's the experience.
So it stops me from being able to get my message across.
Right.
It stops the flow of my special, unique contribution to the world.
That's what he was saying here.
Okay. That's how Sarah was. That's how Sarai was before with the Yud. She was in the Chokhmah itself already, and she can't be there. That's one thing. So you have to separate them. There is a bina there. There has to be a bina there. There has to be some amount of criticism, or call it a reality check. You can call being a reality check. To be a yesh is like to what are you talking about? You have to have some counter argument to what you say.
All right, okay, so let me try to understand what you're saying. So you were saying that there's more like an equilibrium where the Bina aspect of the Chachma is such a powerful Bina because it has aspects of Chachma to it, to the point that it's almost a complete...
No, this is the Bina in Chokhmah. It's not a separate Bina.
The Bina within Chachma.
It's part of the Chokhmah. It's part of the wisdom. It's part of the process that brings new light into the world. Right away, there's a counter indication there. There's something that counters the light that comes in. That's the Bina of Chokhmah.
And if it counters it
Too strongly, it'll stop
completely,
it.
but the way that it would do that would be that Chachma is more infinite properties than Bina. So if Bina if it's relative, if Bina is more, if it's a Bina that is Bina,
it's not the Bina that's separate. It's the Bina within Chokhmah.
Right,
So it's also related to in the infinite.
right? So it's because it's a Bina within Chachma, it's a much more powerful, much more infinite Bina.
Okay, so
and therefore
it's the only thing that can filter out the real Chokhmah.
But if it filters it out too much,
Right.
then
So it could be self-consciousness, that the being comes from self. It could be too much worrying about how people will receive this. Usually when it's within Chokhmah, it's more about me. And it could also be, how would it function in the right way? Why is it there? So the easy answer is, if a person hears voices, he can't trust them. What gives them the reality check about? Let's say I hear something, I think God is talking to me. So what stops me from saying God is talking to me? My Bina in my Chokhmah, my understanding in my wisdom. My wisdom is attuned to all kinds of things. But the Bina there, the understanding there stops me and says, hold on, reality check for a second. You're not a prophet. So if anything is talking to you, it's you yourself. So how much do you trust yourself? Okay, that's a different question. But don't make it into some kind of divine message. So it could be that you have a good idea. Let's think about it. But that's what the Bina in the Chokhmah is supposed to do. I'll give another example. There's, this is not an example that's for everybody. Obviously, I'll have a couple minutes. When mathematicians dream up new math. So there's mathematicians that don't care whether it's realistic or not. Whatever it is, that's what it is. There's a guy called Ramanathan, who was one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century. He passed away when he was 33. He was an Indian, and they brought him to England. He worked under the Whitehead and Russell. And he used to dream math. When I go to sleep, I dream about the food. I don't know what I dream about. When he used to go to sleep, he used to dream up new math that simply didn't exist. And he used to write them down. All his dreams, all his mathematical dreams, are called Ramanathan's notebooks. And they're very famous in the mathematical community. So some of them are like way out there. Nobody knows what in the world he's saying. Nobody understands what he's trying to say. He didn't understand himself, but he thought it would be useful for somebody sometime down in history. So that's why he wrote them down, or he really believed in himself. I don't know. The Bina within the Chokhmah would be, does this have an application? Are you just dreaming up stuff that doesn't mean anything? Which again, a theoretical mathematician doesn't care. He's just in the Chokhmah of Chokhmah. But in the Bina of Chokhmah, it's like asking, does this math actually apply to anything in our reality? And if it does, it's worthwhile pursuing. Let's pursue this idea. So it's asking, is there an application? So that's good Bina. That's how Bina should work. And it's because of that the Bina has what's called Tvunot. And Tvunot is the applicative aspect of Bina. So now we're getting deeper into the Arizal. It's not so important, but that there are certain ways in which the light needs to be applied. And if the Bina can't find it, and the Bina being the representative of Yeshus, of some kind of being, some kind of reality, then stop this thought. It's not worth anything. Okay? So that's where Sarah was. She was this Bina that was in Chokhmah. So that's why her name ended with a Yud. Mashe'enken, lemata b'bchinat Sarah, when she had a hey, when Hashem gave her a hey instead of a Yud, hu lehefech mamash. שאם היה או מצטמצם, היה Very interesting how he wrote mitztamtzim. We don't write it this way. I don't write it this way.
No,
So either it's a mistake.
Because Avraham now had a hay. So now the hay was given to Avram, so now Avram is putting a little bit of the tzimtzum maybe.
No, I'm saying how he wrote grammatically the word mitztamtzim. We don't write it this way today. We reverse. So it's either a mistake, I have to check. It might be just a mistake. But we put the tzaddik before the tet. Mitztamtzim. And here they wrote mitzamtzim. L'chora it's mem taf like they wrote, because mitgale.
Yeah.
But mitgale only has the root only has 3 letters. I think that the reason that you put the taf after the tzaddik is because here the root is a double couple of letters. It has 4 letters. The special roots are called kfulim, that the same 2 letters appear twice, like tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is the root itself. So שאם היה או מצטמצם, היה חושך ואלם והסתר גמור. ועיקר התהוות המציאות על ידי בחינת התפשטות והרחבה דווקא. So when Avram is now already giving the light that he needs to give, if Sarah would remain there, so she would close everything off. So that's not the right way. So instead, there has to be a bina that's outside the chokhmah. And that's what Sarah needed to move to. And this bina does something else. It takes the light and it forms it. It gives it surah. It gives it some kind, it builds it up. That's bina from the meaning of binyan. That bina yitara nitna ba'isha, really what Chazal are trying to say is that she has the ability to build things, to construct things. וכנודע בעניין ג' קוצין של אהוד שהקוץ התחתון מקור וכוח הבינה תלוי בקוץ העליון. Won't get into this one. וכנודע בעניין תמונת שני ה', that the fact that there's 2 h's in י' כ' ו' כ'. ומה שנתווסף לאברהם, אברהם אינו מוליד. אברהם הוא בחינת חוכמה אלה, היינו כמו שמפרש במקרא כי אב המון גויים. הדרך בחינת הנפש שרסו בכלל מבחינת העלאה מזדהה לעומת זה. So Avram had this ability now to become the father of many nations, which really meant, as we saw, to give living people a sense of godliness. אבל הולדת יצחק סדרת הקדושה לא היה צריך, כי אדרבה, כל סדרת הקדושה בחינת ביטול ולא התפשטות, מה שאין כן שרה נתווסף ללידת יצחק. So for Abraham, he didn't need to move down from where he was. He could continue to be the infinite that he was. But in order to bring down from him into reality something that was like him, Sarah had to be not the hay that was in the Chokhmah, she had to be the hay that's outside the Chokhmah. And that's why she had to have the additional hay. So he's saying she didn't lose the Yud really. She remained also attached to Avram at the level of Chokhmah. But now she also came down to become the hay that's separate from Chokhmah. So we'll do a little bit more about this tomorrow.